I have a bunch of other things to be working on right now, but I have not touched a sewing needle in a while, and I have a mending pile slash project pile about this big. Let's go through it and see how much I can get done. I have an hour until I need to leave the house. Let's get right into it, and while I do this, I'm going to tell you how I became a textile technologist and what that actually entailed for me. So this isn't a super informative video today. There's not much that you have to be following along to. It's just me talking about my experiences. So if you have anything you can multitask with, if you have some mending to do, some cleaning of clothes, anything, go ahead. Grab your little chores and get your project piles just a little bit smaller with me. The first project I'm working on is fixing moth holes in this turtleneck that I thrifted for about $5. It is 100% wool. It is really soft. I absolutely love it. It has had many moth holes in its lifetime, and I just fix them one after the other. I do not do a beautiful job at fixing them. I don't do it correctly, but I am entirely okay with my clothes very visibly being mended. I think it's a beautiful thing to mend your clothes, and I think it's totally something that we are allowed to show off and be proud of, that we love and take care of our clothes, so I do not mind it being visible. How did I become a textile technologist? I started a degree when I just turned 18. So I was considering studying fashion design. I wasn't really sure what that would entail job-wise later. To me, that was just not a secure enough option, and so therefore I was like, I want something a little bit more substantial, if you want to call it that. So I thought about fashion management. I looked for fashion management courses that were by state-run schools, because in Germany that means that university is free, or more or less free. I found a degree which was textile technology and textile management. I had a couple of different options of universities and degrees to choose from, and that was just the one that I ended up going with. The degree in its form that I did it in does not exist anymore. They actually ended up changing it actually still while I was there, so the people who started about 2 semesters after me had a slightly different curriculum. Now, what did I actually learn? Towards the end of my degree, I could choose between textile technology and textile management, and I chose the technology direction, which is why I say I'm a textile technologist. I did also learn a bunch about management, but mostly I did textile technology, so that is what I'm going to be speaking on. Essentially, the course covered a lot of the different production techniques and machinery in the textile supply chain. So that means we had several courses on fibers. What are different fibers? What do they mean? What are their characteristics? What are they good for? What are they not good for? Boom. That's the first thing. So fibers would be maybe cotton or linen, but also polyester or any other chemical fiber can be fibers. They're not always. Sometimes they are referred to as filaments, which just means that they are essentially super, super, super long fibers. And if you don't cut them down into short ones, they are actually, in fact, fibers. Note to self and advice to all of you: if you ever find holes in your sweaters and you put them onto your mending pile, maybe mark those holes with a sticker or something so you actually find them when you're mending, because I think there was more than one hole in here. I finished the first one, but I'm just going to pretend like that project is done because I cannot find any other holes right now. Class number 2. Class number 2 was about yarn making. So that means either staple fiber yarn or synthetic yarns. There are very different processes to make those two, and I learned everything about them. So staple fiber yarn, there is a ton of different machines and steps that go into that, and I actually made a fabric school series on that topic, so if you want to go check that out, feel free. Similar weaving and knitting, same thing. I just learned what are the different processes, what do the machines look like. We had a bunch of machines actually at university to look at, to see them run, to see learn about every part of the machine and kind of what it does. We learned that in all 3 of those areas. And then there were a bunch of other topics too. So this is kind of just the main, how do you make a fabric? But then what happens if you want it to actually be blue and not just unbleached cotton? And for that we had textile chemistry and textile Veredelung, which essentially is dyeing and processes like it. So I learned a bunch about those as well. Project number 2 is a long sleeve that somehow got a rip in it because it was caught on something, so I'm just gonna fix that very big gaping rip. So textile chemistry was never honestly my favorite subject. Chemistry has always been something that's just a little too far from me, same as physics, because we also had physics and physics topics at uni. And I personally just never really got into chemistry, which is why I am currently debating whether I should do a series on dyeing fabrics and such, because I genuinely think that my knowledge on the topic is not good enough to be teaching it to other people. So currently I'm thinking that I will not be doing it. I might touch on some topics, but I don't think I'll be making a bigger fabric school series on dyeing fabrics. But yes, I learned dyeing fabrics. I actually just mentioned physics. I also, in general, just in the degree, we did a bunch of basics first. So we had a ton of math and physics, which you might not think of when you think fabrics or fashion. But to be honest, my degree really did not have to do much with fashion because we were always the steps that come ahead of the whole garment making process. Garment making was a very, very, very small part in my degree. So most of my sewing skills and most of my knowledge when it comes to construction of clothes does not come from my degree. Fibers, yarn, weaving, knitting, dyeing. Another thing that we learned about is composite materials. So that means any type of plastic or resin, or could be something else that has fibers embedded in it to make it stronger. So that could, for example, be a carbon fiber bicycle or a tennis racket. I know a bunch of sports equipment uses carbon fiber now, such as, like, I believe poles for pole vaulting, but please do not quote me on this, I'm not fully sure. But you can also use that type of stuff to make windmills, to make airplane parts, any type of aerospace parts, so also rockets and such. So it is a very, very broad topic. It's not just clothes. On that note, technical textiles. What properties does a fabric need to be used for an airbag in a car, for example? What kind of textiles are used in medicine? So yes, small medical equipment such as face masks, that is textile. But then you will also have artery replacements that are put in that are made from polyester, compression socks. Medical textiles, sadly, we didn't have a full course on them. They just kind of were put in here and there in either weaving or knitting. I personally would have really loved to know more on that topic because I think it is very, very interesting. Definitely if someone wants to go into textiles and make money, technical textiles such as also medical textiles and or let's say windmill parts, that would be the way to go. However, I have just always loved the whole creativity aspect of fashion and creating fashion, so this is just how I like to work, and I knew from the beginning that I would probably end up in the fashion world. Currently, where I'm going to end up and what the job is going to be is still up for debate because I am doing my master's. In my master's I chose to go more towards garments, but that is not the topic of today's video. But yes, that is, I would say, the main subjects when it comes to textile technology. But then there's also a bunch of other things that go into that. In general, just the global textile chain, because the global supply chain in textiles is crazy and very, very complicated. You talk about different factories and about the way they should or need to be set up depending on what products you're working with. You talk about time management, you talk about ergonomics at the workplace, tons of topics, quality management, Umwelt management, sustainability in the garment factory, recyclability, sadly, also something that we didn't have a full course on. That was just mentioned here and there. I wish we had done more. Material testing, I completely forgot about that. Once again, one of those things that I just couldn't grasp as well. There's tons of rules and regulations and norms and ways to do it, but essentially textile testing is what tests are done on textiles. So let's say you buy a rain jacket. Rain jackets, they usually have a Wassersäule, which I don't know what that is in English, but it kind of states how waterproof they are, more or less. And you have a specific machine that you test that on, and you have machines that you can test the elasticity on, and all of that. There's different norms, there's different ways to do it, specific machines for a ton of different things. Also abrasion, for example, upholstery fabric has to have very good abrasion scores, otherwise it can't or shouldn't be used for upholstery, because your couch is going to be pilling like crazy and looking absolutely horrible and destroyed after 2 years if that isn't the case. Honestly, for me, on a personal level, it was very interesting to learn just the complexity of what it takes to make a textile. I've always known that it does take quite a few steps, but honestly, just seeing how many is crazy. So for example, if you think about spinning, in my head it was, okay, you have your fibers, you might comb them, bring them in the right direction, and then you instantly spin them and you have a thread or a yarn, depending on how thick or stable you make it. But then there is so many more steps, and there is different fiber lengths and classes for fibers depending on how long they are. Different yarns depending on whether you comb out the small, short, not so useful fibers or if you don't. So all in all, everything is a lot more complex than what I expected, and it is very eye-opening to see. Even in my fabric school content, I try to give you guys the rundown of how something is made, but I cannot in any way give you all of the info that I learned over the course of 4 years in half an hour. It just sadly isn't possible, even though I would love to share all the information that I have with you guys, because I think it is very important for the general public and the consumers to know what goes into making a textile and making a garment, to finally see the value in those again, and to appreciate every single piece of fabric and textile that is out there, because the work and the steps and the labor that went into those is crazy. Aside from learning how complex the processes are in the entire chain and just how many steps go into it, one thing I also learned is just how different the processes are from doing it in your own home, for example. The one that's closest is definitely sewing, which is something that I think the general public doesn't understand. All garments are handmade. You have to take your 2 pieces and feed them through the sewing machine. That is done by hand, essentially everywhere. There are some steps, like for example, putting on the back pocket of a pair of jeans. Beautiful. That can be done by one machine automatically, but most of the process is still done with labor by hand, very labor intensive, and no, sadly, making garments is not automated. Labor is always needed, and when it comes to prices of fast fashion, bad labor practices are going to stay prevalent. That is sadly just the truth. When it comes to other processes though, like weaving, knitting, or spinning, those have a much higher degree of automation. So I would say the earlier on in the supply chain, the higher degree of automation you have. When it comes to garments and clothing, I said I didn't learn much about that in my degree. So essentially the courses on that I had one course where we learned about a bunch of different sewing machines and stitches and what those sewing machines can do. We had one course where we learned about like the very basics of pattern drafting, and then we had one more course where we worked with Clo 3D and Blender. Now, Clo 3D is one of the leading, I'm just gonna say that there's a couple, but one of the leading 3D simulation tools for garments and clothing. 3D simulation in clothing and textile is still very much behind a bunch of other industries. Other industries are so much further when it comes to that. When it comes to textiles, they do not behave the same in all the directions, so simulation of textiles is just a very complex topic, and we learned Clo 3D and how to use it, and then Blender. Blender is a software which a lot of game developers use, for example. It's free to use, therefore a lot of people like to use it, and you can make 3D objects in it, and using that in combination with Clo 3D is quite a fun little experiment. I would say the subjects that I talked about first are probably the most interesting to people that are interested in my videos. This is what it looks like finished. So there was one big tear which had like a point, a corner to it. This is how I sewed it up. You can definitely see it was mended. Because this is a knit, I could have gotten a thread and literally just made sure to pick up all the stitches that had fallen and try to really knit it as beautifully as possible. I personally just like to mend like this. Just a simple stitch, ladder stitch, where I just pull everything together and that's it. Very visible, but like I said, I like visible mending. I like it when it's visible that I take care of my clothes and that I fix them myself. I think that is totally fine. Next thing, pair of leggings. The inseam is entirely destroyed. For this one, I will use my overlock. I think that's just going to be the easiest way, so I'm going to put these to the side for now because the overlock is going to be too loud to talk over. So instead, I'm going to do this one, also as a whole. Apparently that is the theme for today's video. I'll just grab some black thread and do the same as I did with the other ones. I think I gave you pretty much the rundown that you're going to need of my degree. You know what I learned now, you know what I did. A lot of ins and outs. Once again, I can't find the hole. Tiny little hole in the front. I'm going to fix that the same way I did for the tear. I have my degree in textile technology. Now I'm doing garment development. With that, I kind of have the combination of both knowing the textiles and how those are made, but then also knowing the garment and how those are made, and I love that combination. I've always loved it, which is why I did textiles to go with all of the sewing skills I had already collected on YouTube and such. It is quite a niche topic, honestly. In Germany, there's like 3 or 4-ish bachelor's degrees that go in that direction. Most of them more focused on garments, however. So it's really not a lot. Most of the industry also, when it comes to textile making, however, is no longer in Europe. With that degree, either you're going quite niche-y or you're going more into the machine production than you are into the actual textile production, because there are still a couple of machine producers in Germany. So let's say weaving or knitting machines. Within the degree also, there was one internship that one had to do, about 6 months. I went to a startup in Stuttgart that made sustainable garments with a really, really beautiful message. The startup was called Aid. Unfortunately, they no longer sell clothes. Once I did that internship, I decided myself to add another internship on top, which I did at Puma. And both of my internships, I would say, were kind of around the world of development. Now, development in the garment world just kind of means you are the middleman between design and production. So you tell the designers more or less what is possible, and then you talk to production on how to execute it. You tell production to make samples that look like XYZ, and then you review those samples. Those are my 2 internships that I did over the course of my degree, which were incredibly helpful for me to get an insight into the business, the industry itself. Since then, I have not actually been working and just doing studying and social media. I've had enough on my plate with just those 2 things, and I am very happy with how it's going so far, and I'm going to do my thesis in the next semester, and then I'll be done with my master's, so we will see where the world takes me. Talking about where the world takes me, I need to leave very, very soon. So this is what is left on my pile. This one here is one big project. I have a specific type of underwear that I like to wear, and I rebought it. I got 3 more packs of it, and I opened all of them. I put the first pair on, and it did not fit properly because they changed out the elastic on the edge. It is now a lot less stretchy than it was before, so they don't fit anymore. It is really infuriating because, like I said, I unpacked all of them, so I can't return any of them. And I am incredibly mad because it's a basic design of theirs that they changed without informing the customer, which is always a very bad thing to do, because I will probably not be purchasing them again. But yes, what I'm doing right now is I'm literally seam ripping all of the elastics off of the edge, and the very end I'm going to replace them with this elastic, which I've had for ages because I wanted to make my own underwear a long time ago. Never got to it, but I had this. This is a lot softer and stretchier, so I'm going to replace it with this, and then those are finally going to be wearable. So that is a long project. The unpicking just genuinely takes forever, so that's kind of more of like a movie thing. Won't be able to do that today. This right here, you can see that stain. I dropped some argan oil onto it. I use argan oil for my face as my skincare. I love it. It's amazing. But whenever I get it onto my clothes, that oil stain will not get out even if I wash it. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of a spot treatment to get that oil out of there, and then it will be as good as new. And I'm going to actually do that now because I already have something spot treatmented and soaking in the bathroom currently, so I might as well just add that to the pile. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was very, very random.